So if you're new here or you've ever fallen down that jumping spider rabbit hole, which is the whole reason why I guess this channel exists, chances are you had at least one of these questions. So today's video is just going to be full of FAQs because I have so many questions that are asked every single day that I can barely get back to them. So that's what this video is going to be about today. No judgment, no gatekeeping, just information. So this is potentially the most commonly asked question I get, and I have to admit I get asked it about maybe 20 times a day, and I'm not exaggerating. Like, even on old content I'll get that question every single day, and it's really hard to get back to those comments. So here is the answer. I have never personally been bitten by a jumping spider because they are just very unlikely to bite. They will typically run away and hide. That's usually what happens. But have been cases where people have been bitten by jumping spiders, and in my experience it's usually wild caught that have been taken into captivity. Because they're used to certain conditions, they are probably more fearful of the big human that is handling them or is around them. That's at least in my experience anyway. Because I don't have wild caught, it's more friends that tell me that experience from across the pond. So short answer is it's complicated, but typically no. So essentially bites are extremely rare, and it'll only be if they feel threatened or they feel like they can't escape from a situation. It's their last resort. So if we were being cornered, you know, we wouldn't just give in to it. We would often lash out back. You have to think about it in similar terms. For most people, it often apparently feels like a pinprick or a wasp sting. So if you've ever had that happen, that's apparently what it feels like. I don't know, because I've never been properly bitten by a jumping spider, ever. So I cannot, from my experience, tell you what that feels like. But from what I've been told, tiny pinprick, bee sting, that sort of thing. This is another question that I get asked a lot, and I find it, I don't know. So people often ask me, are jumping spiders poisonous? No, but they are venomous. And that sounds absolutely terrifying, especially if you're just hearing this for the first time and you're like, they're venomous and so many people keep them? Hear me out. Their venom is not medically significant to humans. A lot of the time when jumping spiders bite, they don't even tend to pierce your skin. It just, either they can't pierce the skin or it's not medically significant, kind of like a bee sting. So unless you're allergic to like insect bites and things, obviously you're going to want to consult your doctor before thinking about diving down the rabbit hole that is owning jumping spiders. I'm not a substitute for medical advice, so always consult your doctor if you have an allergic reaction to insects, because if you ever are, in the rare chance, bitten by a jumping spider, it could be medically significant to you, but it rarely ever is. Basically, for the vast majority of people, it poses no risk at all. I think we should get a jumping spider out now, because I keep diving into videos and then not actually having a jumping spider out, but I always get intense arm ache after I record these videos because I just want to have them here all the time. So I think I'm going to grab Cheeto, because Cheeto is our most orange jumping spider. She's gorgeous. She's still technically juvenile. I would say one more and she's sub-adult, and she's already really huge. So, and I've never shown her in a long form video before. So I'm going to grab Cheeto and then we will get started on the next question. Let's get her used to my hand a minute, because I want her to feel safe. I don't ever want her to feel threatened. But if you see, she is so orange. She is our, I think people call them in America, Phidippus regius rastafari, I think. Over here we call them Blue Mountains. And actually she's super special to me because our first spider in this journey was called Pixie, and she was a Phidippus regius Blue Mountain. So Cheeto does hold a special place in our heart. Hello. She's like, what's going on? Why is it so bright? And she's back. Right, so let's try and answer some of these questions and not move my hand too much, because I think that's what might be Hello, baby. Hi. Hi. Anyway, right, let's move on. So, I do have the questions here, that's why I'm holding my phone. Do jumping spiders recognize people? I love this question because there is an answer that I want to give, but we have to be realistic here, and I never want to spread misinformation. Ooh. Is she about to jump down? Yeah, she's laid a tether. And she's on my leg. Although jumping spiders do have excellent vision, and you could argue that they're very, very visually aware because of their 8 eyes and their massive front-facing eyes, they don't recognise people like mammals do. Hello. They can become familiar with movement, with routine, and I guess our presence. I don't know if that's kind of understandable because it's not really. Bless her. I think I'm speaking too loud. Hi. They can become familiar with movement, routine, and our presence, is what I was trying to say. I guess that's why you may see calmer spiders when those keepers handle them regularly. So let's move on to the next question, because it's kind of related to what I'm doing right now. And that is, do jumping spiders like being held? Now this to me is a big one, and it's a complicated one. And I know I keep using that word in this video, but it's multifaceted. And it really just does depend on the spider. Like, genuinely, it really does just depend. And you can always tell when they're nervous and when you shouldn't hold them. She's going to jump in a minute. Bear with me. So I guess, in a way, jumping spiders don't seek attention like cats and dogs, I suppose, or at least my dogs do. They love attention. My cat, not so much. There's so much web from where she's been tethering. So, what was I going to say? So they don't seek out attention, but some tolerate handling better than others. So Cheeto doesn't tolerate handling as well as Chai. Chai's older, she's been handled more. She recognises my presence more because she's been in my presence more. I don't know if that makes sense, but that made sense in my head. But Cheeto still is really good with handling because she's not running away, she's not showing her fangs, she's not threatened. She will just stay on my hand as long as you don't corner her, which I don't, you know, she's absolutely fine. So I think this is the thing. When jumping spiders walk on your hand, that's not them wanting affection, that's them exploring. And I know that sometimes jumping spider content can anthropomorphize, and I think myself included, we're often sort of guilty in that we want to show off jumping spiders' personalities. That is what we want to do. That is what we love to do. Sometimes it can be mistaken that they recognise you and that they want affection from you. That's just simply not the case. So handling should always be optional and led by the spider. Always. If a spider starts to rear up, runs away, that is your sign that they do not want to explore you and they do not want to be held. I love this question. So I may put her back in her enclosure after this question because obviously she's never done this before. There's bright lights looking at us and I don't want her to get overwhelmed. So we'll do one more question, won't we, Baba? And then I'm going to put you back because this is the thing. You have to be able to read your spider, and if you feel that they're uncomfortable or getting there, act on it responsibly. I get this question again probably about 10 times a day. Sorry, I'm not holding her, but I don't want to overwhelm her too much. Hello. Right. I'm going to put her back just because I don't want her to get stressed and overwhelmed, and she's performed beautifully today. I say performed. She's not a decoration. She's my pet, but... Hi. Right, where were we? Right, so I get asked this question all the time, and I can never get back to the comments quick enough because then another person asked the question, and that is, are jumping spiders good for beginners? And my answer always is yes, with preparation and research. They're small, they are absolutely fascinating, and they don't require constant interaction. Like, if you never want to handle a jumping spider, that's fine. They don't require you to handle them. They will happily live in an enclosure that is all decked out with things that they can climb on, that they can web up. As long as they've got enough room and they've got enough stimulation in their enclosure, you don't need to handle them. Because I've had a lot of people say, I really want a jumping spider, but I don't want to hold them. That's absolutely fine. It's your choice whether you handle a spider, but it should always be on their terms. But going back to that, they do need proper enclosures. So as I mentioned in my previous video, I think it was the last one I uploaded, you need to have a proper enclosure. So the front opening, the 3 walls of ventilation, so there's no stagnant air in the enclosure. You need things that they can tether up, like cork bark. I usually have little leaf ledges. I have flowers to give off that they are in the wild. So try and make it as realistic as possible. Which can be a bit difficult if you're not doing bioactive, but you can have a fully artificial setting and then feel completely safe and at ease. So essentially they're great beginner pets, but only for people who are willing to do the research and are willing to put the money into proper enclosures, decor, food requirements, things like that. You need to be willing to also be able to keep live food, because they eat live food, and that puts a lot of people off. So ours will eat flies. And we gut feed the flies with jelly pots and then feed them. You need to have a system in place, basically. We always use the trusted butterfly net method, which I may do in another video when it's feeding day, because today is not feeding day, tomorrow's feeding day. You need to make sure that you be okay and comfortable feeding live food to them, because they won't, like, they're predatory hunters. They need to be able to capture their prey. So this is maybe the saddest question that I always get asked, but it's completely valid, and a lot of the time it does put people off. How long do jumping spiders live for? And truly there's no correct answer to this, because it varies so much. On average, for me at least, females live between 1 to 3 years, and that's when they leave the nest. That's not when they mature, it's when they leave the nest. When I first started this, I thought that meant once they matured. No. Like, leave the nest. So it's always good, if you're going to buy a jumping spider, to ask the breeder when they left the nest, so you actually know how old they are. Again, it can really vary. You may not get 3 years, you may not even get 1 year on either gender. So it really does just depend on how good the setup is, their feeding, because the more often you feed them, the quicker their metabolism is and the quicker they'll die. That is the biology of it. We don't feed our slings too often because we want them to have a longer lifespan. We don't want to quicken them molting. I suppose it depends on instar. I can make a whole other video on that as well, but ultimately they don't live long at all. And when I tell you that it is tough losing jumping spiders, it is, because although they're really tiny and they're an insect, they're an arachnid, it's painful. Every single loss, at least for me, is painful. So if you're somebody who makes deep, meaningful connection with any pet that you have, I would seriously think about this, because every death of any spider that I've had, I've cried for days, because it's just not the whole day, but just on and off. But then you've got to remember that you wouldn't be crying unless you had such a beautiful experience. And for me, that overrides it. Like, it is sad, but they brought me so much joy that that's what I choose to remember in times where I'm feeling distressed and sad about it. So this is when I get asked, not a lot, but I get asked it and I'm like, ugh, and I feel like I have to respond because it's kind of dangerous. But a lot of people say or ask, can jumping spiders live together? Again, it's kind of a complicated answer in terms of when they're growing up. But short answer, no. They are cannibalistic. And the reason that I've said it's a complicated answer is because as a breeder, unless I'm breeding Hylas diardi, I separate all the slings at I2 into their own individual pots. But with Hylas, you can raise them together until around I5, and then you can separate them. So in terms of living together, if you're a breeder and you're raising a Helistiade clutch, the answer is yes until I5. But if you're somebody who's wanting to buy a jumping spider, like as an adult or as a juvenile subadult, no, they need to be on their own. So I mentioned this briefly before, but what do jumping spiders eat? My jumping spiders eat flightless fruit flies as slings. When they hit around I6, I upgrade to green bottle flies, and then when they're adults, blue bottle flies. And the reason that I do this is because in my experience, my jumping spiders have never refused flying prey. They always latch on. I know a lot of breeders will feed mealworms and crickets, and you can do that, that's completely up to you. The reason that we don't is because they're quite fatty as like food sources, so you can't exactly take off or take food away from them when they've got it in between their fangs, and you could end up overfeeding them accidentally, and you can't take it off them. So that's one of the reasons why we don't use them. But another reason is because they bite, and I know that it's not often that they will bite, but I never want that to be an eventuality ever for any of my spiders to be bitten by something that they're meant to eat. Also, I find that flies are a very similar size to the jumping spider. I know they can take down prey that's bigger than them, but they don't have to, and it can be done safely. So we always stick to flies. We gut load them with jelly pots, and then they have plenty of nutrition in them, and we've never had a problem feeding flies. So that's what we feed. However, some people can feed mealworms, mini mealworms for the juveniles, pinhead crickets for juveniles, regular crickets for adults. It really does just depend on who you speak to, but we love flies. Oh, another quick diversion. Never feed wild caught prey. So never take food from out in the wild and feed it to your spider, because it could have parasites. Yeah, it could just hold parasites and then kill your spider. So always buy from a shop. And this one is a nice one to end it on. Why are jumping spiders so misunderstood? And honestly, it's because we're taught to fear spiders rather than make an effort to understand them. Jumping spiders, in my opinion, challenge that narrative massively. They show us that not everything that is small is mysterious and dangerous, but rather can benefit us in multiple ways. So I really hope that I was able to answer any or some of the questions that you have about jumping spiders. And if I didn't, feel free to pop them down below, and I can do another video addressing those questions as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.